The autumn air in Central Park carries a certain crispness that never fails to stir something deep inside me. At 75, I find myself walking slower, lingering longer, allowing the world to wash over me instead of rushing past. Today, as I wander along a winding path lined with yellowing leaves, I see a group of students gathered around a portable speaker, their bodies moving in rhythm, carefree and alive. Their laughter echoes through the trees, sharp and bright, and in an instant it pulls me back to a time when music and movement were not just part of my life, but the very reason I breathed. I was once a dance instructor, though that word feels too small for what the profession truly meant. Dance was never just steps on polished floors, nor arms positioned just so. For me, it was the art of unlocking something hidden in people. The confidence they didn't know they had, the grace they believed they'd lost, the joy they had forgotten. Watching those students swaying and spinning, I smell again the faint polish of the studio floors where I once taught, the sweat of exertion mingling with the sweet powder of rosin. I hear the old turntables clicking before the music caught, the piano keys struck by the accompanist who always seemed to know just when to slow or speed up. And I feel the energy, the raw energy of young bodies discovering the language of movement for the first time. I close my eyes and I see myself not as I am now, but as I was then. Tall, lean, hair slicked back, a whistle around my neck, guiding eager feet across scuffed wood floors in a modest studio in a small American town. I wasn't born into the world of art and dance. No, my journey began in the most ordinary way, in a modest household where music was a luxury and dancing was a thing reserved for weddings and community halls. Yet somehow it called to me, this rhythm, this unspoken dialogue of movement. And as I stand here, an old man in the park, watching strangers move without self-consciousness, I realize that dance has never left me. It still lives in my bones, even if my steps have slowed. That day in the park, seeing them, it was the spark that pulled me back into memory, into the long, winding story of how I became who I am. And so, let me tell it to you, from the beginning. I grew up in a small Midwestern town, the kind with one main street, a corner diner, and a school gym that doubled as the center of community life. My father was a machinist, his hands always blackened by grease, his back bent from labor. My mother kept the home, neat and modest, filled with the smells of bread baking and laundry soap. We didn't have much, but we had enough. Dance wasn't something boys like me were expected to care about. In those days, the world was stricter, narrower. Boys played baseball, fixed cars, and talked about joining the service. Yet I found myself drawn to the rare nights when the town hall hosted dances. I'd sit on the sidelines, a gangly kid in hand-me-down shoes, watching couples twirl under dim lights strung from the ceiling. The music from the record player wasn't perfect. It cracked, skipped, sometimes slowed, but it was enough. Enough to awaken something in me I didn't yet understand. It was my sister, actually, who first dragged me onto the floor. She was older, bold, and unwilling to let me hide in the shadows. I remember her grabbing my hand during a jitterbug tune, her laughter filling the hall as she pulled me along. I stumbled, tripped, nearly fell, but for the first time I felt alive. My body moved in ways it never had before, awkward at first, but then freer, like it had been waiting all along for permission.
After that night, I couldn't shake it. I practiced steps in the kitchen when no one was looking, sliding across the linoleum floor in my socks. I mimicked the dancers I saw in the few magazines we could afford, trying to make my body echo theirs. My parents didn't understand, not at first. My father would shake his head, muttering about wasting time, while my mother just smiled softly, as though she saw something neither of us could name. I didn't know it then, but those secret rehearsals, those stolen moments of movement, were the first steps toward a life I couldn't yet imagine. A life far removed from the quiet predictability of my small town. A life that would carry me into studios, theaters, and ballrooms, into places where the very air seemed to vibrate with rhythm and possibility. But before all that, before the stages and the applause, there was just a boy in a kitchen, sliding across the floor, heart pounding with something that felt a lot like destiny. By the time I was 16, I had discovered the small dance studio tucked behind a row of shops on Main Street. Its windows were fogged with condensation, the faint scent of rosin and linseed oil seeping through cracks in the door. I remember pushing it open for the first time, heart hammering, palms sweaty, and being greeted by the warm glow of sunlight filtering through dusty panes, illuminating mirrored walls and wooden floors worn smoothed by decades of dancers' steps. The instructor, Mr. Coldwell, was a man in his 50s with a sharp eye and a quiet authority. He didn't smile much at first, but when he did, it was a nod of approval that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. He had a way of seeing beyond your awkwardness, beyond the uncertainty that clung to every move. That day, I shuffled into the studio, trying to make my feet obey me, and he said simply, "You've got rhythm, kid. Now let's find your confidence." I spent hours there, after school and on weekends, learning the basics, posture, timing, balance. I learned to listen, not just to the music, but to the space around me, to my own body, and to the people I moved with. I practiced tirelessly, often alone, my reflection in the mirror, both critic and teacher. There were times I wanted to give up, to run back to the safety of baseball games and the predictable streets of my town, but something deeper kept me tethered to the studio. The music became a heartbeat I couldn't ignore. Friendships formed in those early years that I would carry with me for decades. Tommy, a wiry kid with a permanent smudge of chalk on his hands, was my first real partner. We would tumble through steps, sometimes falling over each other, laughing until our ribs ached. And then there was Grace, a girl with quiet determination, whose laughter had a way of lighting up the studio like a sudden sunbeam.
But it wasn't all laughter. I remember the sting of judgment from peers outside the studio, whispers of soft and sissy that hung in the hallways of my high school. I learned early that pursuing what I loved would not always be easy, that the world could be unkind to those who dared to follow their hearts. And yet, every time I stepped onto that polished floor, every time I felt the music surge through me, the world's doubts faded into the background. Those teenage years were formative, not just in skill but in shaping who I would become. A man who could balance discipline and artistry, who could take criticism without losing himself, who could find joy even in the face of skepticism. And little did I know, the boy learning to move in a small-town studio was already beginning the journey toward a lifetime of dance, of passion, of storytelling through motion. By the time I turned 20, I had earned my first real teaching gig at a community center a few towns over. The space was modest, concrete floors, fluorescent lights humming above, a faint smell of old sweat and polished wood. But it was mine to shape. I remember the first class I led,
a group of teenagers and young adults, some hesitant, some bold, all curious. My heart raced as I guided them through steps I had once struggled to master myself. Each correction I offered, each word of encouragement, carried the weight of my own journey. I was learning as much as I was teaching. The energy of the room, the unspoken connections between dancers, the way a single gesture could transform hesitation into confidence. It all became intoxicating. I started choreographing small routines for local recitals, watching the pride and excitement light up the faces of my students. That was when I understood the real magic of being a dance instructor. It wasn't just about skill, it was about awakening something inside people, helping them discover strength, rhythm, and expression they didn't know they had. During those years, I met mentors and colleagues who would shape my approach to dance and life. There was Mr. Lewis, a former Broadway performer with a cane and a sharp wit, who taught me that every movement carries emotion, that technique alone is hollow without feeling. And then there was Maria, a ballerina whose presence commanded respect and admiration. Her critiques were brutal, but her praise felt like a treasure. Through them, I learned resilience, patience, and the courage to take creative risks. Of course, not every day was easy. I wrestled with self-doubt, with the lingering voices of those who mocked my passion. There were nights I returned home, exhausted, wondering if the sacrifices were worth it, questioning whether I could sustain a life devoted to something so intangible. Yet in the quiet hours, I would replay a perfect pirouette, a smile from a student who finally nailed a difficult step, or the applause at a recital. And in those moments, every doubt melted away. Romance found me too, unexpectedly in the whirl of music and movement. Claire, with her effortless grace and kind eyes, became my partner not just on the dance floor, but in life. Together, we dreamed, stumbled, and soared. We celebrated small victories and comforted each other through setbacks. Our love grew in rhythm with the steps we practiced. It was during these formative adult years that I truly understood the duality of this life, the exhilaration of creation, the warmth of human connection, the sting of rejection, and the sweet, quiet triumphs that no one but you may notice. Dance was no longer just a passion. It was the lens through which I saw the world, the thread that connected me to people, memories, and ultimately, to myself. By my late 20s, I had carved out a reputation in our small circuit of dance schools and local theaters. Students came to me from towns over, drawn by word of mouth and the little buzz that had started following my classes. The studio became a second home. The polished wooden floors that reflected the soft afternoon sun, the faint scent of liniment and old rosin lingering in the air, the rhythmic tapping of shoes on the floor that became a heartbeat of its own. I started choreographing more ambitious routines, some for local competitions, others for community events. The adrenaline of those first performances was unmatched. The sweat trickling down my back, the music vibrating through the floor, the anxious yet hopeful glances exchanged among my students. Every rehearsal was a lesson, every misstep a reminder that perfection is a journey, not a destination. It wasn't all applause and accolades. I faced my share of disappointment. Some routines fell flat, judges were harsh, and occasionally talented students moved on to bigger cities, leaving an emptiness in the studio. Yet I learned to savor small victories. A shy teenager finding courage in a solo, a couple mastering a tricky lift, the subtle, almost imperceptible shift when someone started to believe in themselves. Those moments were my reward, far more than any trophy or ribbon. The friendships I forged during this period were as vital as any choreography. I remember Leo, a fellow instructor with a wild laugh and a heart to match, who would stay late just to critique routines and swap stories about our early struggles.
and Ellen, whose patience rivaled the greatest conductors, often guiding students through moments of fear and frustration. Together, we shared not only knowledge, but the weight of responsibility, shaping young lives with every beat, every step, every breath. Love remained a constant rhythm in my life, too. Claire and I found balance between our personal world and the studio. We celebrated recitals together, shared quiet evenings planning new routines, and occasionally argued over interpretations of movements, only to find laughter and tenderness in our reconciliation. Through her, I discovered that partnership wasn't just about harmony on the dance floor. It was about weathering life's missteps together. As my reputation grew, so did my responsibilities. Auditions, competitions, and teaching multiple classes each day demanded endurance, focus, and unwavering dedication. The exhaustion was real, but every tired muscle and every sleepless night was worth it when a student's face lit up with newfound confidence, or when applause rang out in a tiny auditorium echoing off walls lined with photographs and programs. It was a period of growth, exhilaration, and unexpected lessons. A time when I realized that being a dance instructor was not merely a job, but a calling. I was sculpting not just bodies, but hearts and minds, leaving imprints that would linger long after the music faded. By my mid-30s, the sparkle of early success had begun to blend with the weight of responsibility. The studio, once a sanctuary, started feeling like a second job and a relentless heartbeat I could never turn off. Competitions became more intense, the stakes higher, and the expectations from parents and students alike heavier than I had imagined. Injuries were inevitable. I remember Jonathan, a lanky 16-year-old with enormous potential, tearing a tendon mid-rehearsal. The panic in his eyes mirrored my own, and the hours we spent in the sterile smell of the clinic, bandaging, stretching, and encouraging him, left me drained but more determined. I realized then that being a dance instructor wasn't just about teaching steps. It was about nurturing resilience, patience, and trust. Pressure mounted from every direction. Judges critiqued routines with the precision of surgeons, parents debated over technique or rehearsal schedules, and rival studios eyed our success with envy. There were nights I'd lie awake in our small apartment, listening to the city hum below, questioning whether I had bitten off more than I could chew. Doubt crept in quietly, like a shadow at dusk, whispering fears I didn't want to confront. Love, too, faced tests. Claire's career in music often pulled her away for weeks. I felt the ache of missed dinners, the loneliness of empty evenings, and yet every time we reunited, it was as though no time had passed. Our laughter filled the rooms again, the shared glances reassuring me that we were tethered together despite the chaos of life. Friendships, too, bore the strain of ambition. Leo, once my partner in mischief and late-night choreography sessions, began chasing opportunities in larger cities, and eventually we grew apart. I learned the hard truth. The bonds forged in sweat and laughter could sometimes fray under the weight of distance and competing dreams. Yet, in the midst of exhaustion and doubt, there were moments of pure magic. A student nailing a complicated turn after weeks of struggle, a local crowd rising to their feet after a performance. The smell of polished wood mingled with the faint aroma of old rosin. It all reminded me why I persisted. These fleeting triumphs, these bursts of shared joy became my lifeline,
anchoring me to the purpose that first drew me to dance. It was a time of learning resilience, balancing pride with humility, and discovering that being a teacher meant embracing both the brilliance and the heartbreak of guiding others. Through struggle, doubt, and occasional despair, I began to understand the profound impact my work had, not just on the students, but on me. Everything shifted when I met Sophia. She was 12, quiet, almost invisible at first, slipping into the studio with a hesitant step, eyes wide with curiosity and a trace of fear. Most kids her age wanted immediate applause, trophies, or praise, but she carried a kind of stillness that intrigued me. I remember thinking, this one, she might just surprise me. Her first weeks were frustrating. Tiny mistakes, misaligned posture, hesitation in spins. Yet there was a fire in her eyes, a hunger to learn, and I found myself pushing harder, but also softer, more patient than I had been in years. We stayed late after classes, the faint smell of sweat and polished wood wrapping around us like a second skin. Me demonstrating, correcting, encouraging her. Her perseverance reminded me of why I'd fallen in love with teaching in the first place. Sophia's progress was astonishing. She learned intricate routines that had taken others months to master. With each breakthrough, I felt a rush of pride and a rekindling of passion I hadn't realized I'd lost. But it wasn't just about technique. It was about mentoring, shaping a young spirit and witnessing the transformation from fear to confidence. There were challenges, of course. A rival studio accused us of unfair advantages during competitions, sparking tension and late-night debates with parents and other instructors. I felt the old familiar burn of stress, but this time I knew I had Sophia counting on me. Her trust became my anchor. The first time she performed a solo on stage, the auditorium filled with anticipation. I watched from the wings, heart hammering. Every movement was precise yet expressive, every leap a testament to her dedication. When the applause erupted, she didn't just shine, she lit up the room, and I felt tears prick my eyes. I realized then that being a dance teacher wasn't just a job. It was a responsibility, a calling, a privilege. Through her, I reconnected with the exhilaration I had felt in my youth, the thrill of creation, and the joy of shaping someone's journey. My heart, which had felt weighed down by routine, reignited. I remembered why I'd chosen this path, and how fleeting but profound these moments could be. Sophia became more than a student. She became a mirror, reflecting the best of my own ambition, patience, and love for the art. And in her eyes I found reassurance that my life, with all its highs and lows, was still capable of producing something beautiful, something lasting. As the years rolled on, the rhythm of my life settled into a steady pulse. Early mornings opening the studio, late nights reviewing routines, weekends filled with competitions and recitals. It wasn't glamorous, and it certainly wasn't easy. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, even simple dinners with family. The smell of linoleum polish, rosin, and sweat became the scent of my existence, and yet I wouldn't trade it for anything. Some days were exhausting in ways words can't capture. Parents arguing over placement in classes, rival instructors trying to undermine my methods, students who lost motivation or gave up mid-season. It all weighed heavily. I remember nights when I'd sit alone in the dim studio, the echo of empty halls bouncing around me, thinking, is all this worth it? And then I'd hear Sophia's laugh, or watch a student land a perfect pirouette, and I'd remember why I had started. Friendships formed here were unlike any other. Fellow instructors, choreographers, even costume designers, they became a second family. We shared triumphs, failures, and late-night pizza after marathon rehearsals. But not all relationships were pure. I faced betrayal too. A colleague once took credit for choreography I had painstakingly created, and the sting of that deceit cut deep. But it also taught me resilience and the importance of keeping my integrity intact.
Love intertwined with all this chaos. I met Rachel during a recital. She was a costume designer, meticulous, creative, passionate. Our relationship was a dance in itself, sometimes in sync, sometimes stepping on each other's toes. We married, had children, and for a while, life seemed like the perfect choreography. But time, pressures, and small misunderstandings created tension. Love, like dance, required constant attention, adjustment, and forgiveness. Through every misstep, victory, heartbreak, and joy, I learned that life, like a performance, demanded presence. I discovered how to cherish fleeting moments, the rush of applause, the quiet satisfaction of a student mastering a difficult move, the warmth of laughter echoing off the studio walls. These were the treasures of my career, the small yet profound reasons I kept moving forward. And through it all, I never stopped dancing, not literally, not figuratively. Even at 70, I would step onto the studio floor, demonstrating steps with muscles aching, joints complaining, yet heart alight with the same fervor that had carried me through decades. Retirement crept up on me quietly, like the final measures of a familiar song. One morning, after a particularly long rehearsal, I caught myself leaning on the barre longer than usual, muscles trembling, joints aching, and I realized my body could no longer keep pace with my ambition. The thought was bittersweet. Years of devotion to my students, my craft, my art, yet now the time had come to let go. I remember walking through the empty studio that evening, the polished floor gleaming under the soft glow of the overhead lights. The echoes of laughter and clattering tap shoes still lingered in the air, but the room felt different, less mine, yet filled with memories that no one could erase. I traced my fingers along the worn wooden barre, feeling the grooves, the faint scratches left by countless hands before mine, and I understood that my legacy wasn't in the walls or the mirrors, but in the lives I had touched. Saying goodbye to my students was the hardest. Some of them cried, others tried to hide their tears with forced smiles. I gave them advice, hugs, and my quiet blessing, hoping that my years of guidance had planted seeds that would flourish long after I stepped away. And yet, a small part of me worried. What if I wasn't enough? What if my absence left a void that couldn't be filled? Even leaving Rachel was a challenge. She had watched me devote myself so completely to the studio, sacrificing weekends, evenings, even simple meals together. Our love had endured countless pirouettes of joy and missteps of frustration, and now we faced a new dance, one of slowing down, of adjusting to days without the pulse of music and movement dictating our schedules. I took long walks through Central Park those first weeks of retirement, letting the sounds of the city and the rustle of leaves soothe the ache in my chest. I watched children spin in the breeze, couples practice their own subtle rhythms,
and remembered the thrill of seeing potential blossom under my guidance. It was in those moments that I realized retirement wasn't an ending. It was a different kind of performance, quieter, reflective, yet no less meaningful. Retirement, I discovered, had its own rhythm, slower, gentler, yet full of unexpected surprises. I began to notice things I had missed during the whirlwind of teaching, the way sunlight spilled across the studio windows in the morning, the faint scent of freshly baked bread from the cafe around the corner, the chatter of neighbors as they strolled past my apartment. Life moved differently now, and I was learning to move with it instead of against it. I took to visiting the community center, offering informal workshops to anyone curious about dance. The faces were older, younger, sometimes hesitant, but their gratitude reminded me of why I had devoted my life to teaching. I felt the spark of connection again, the same spark I had felt decades ago when a timid student finally executed a perfect turn or leap. The joy was quieter now, but no less profound. Rachel and I began taking small trips, exploring towns we had passed by in our youth, stopping at diners, old theaters, and little art galleries. I watched her laugh at things I had forgotten to notice, and I felt an intimacy that wasn't born from passion alone, but from shared history, shared struggles, and survival. We were partners in every sense, navigating the slower tempo of our new life together. Even small acts brought delight, teaching a curious grandchild a simple waltz in the living room, listening to music from my record collection, rediscovering the thrill of feeling rhythm in my own body, even if I could no longer perform the complicated steps I once did. Life had shifted, but beauty and joy were still present, just in different forms. Through these days, I realized that the essence of my life as a dance instructor wasn't in the applause or accolades, it was in the movement, the connection, the shared moments of learning, failure, and triumph. Those things couldn't be taken away, and they followed me everywhere, quietly shaping each day of my retirement. One crisp autumn afternoon, as I wandered through the park, I noticed a familiar figure, tall, poised, with a certain lightness in her step that made my chest tighten. It was Emily, one of my very first students, now grown, her hair streaked with silver, but her eyes still carrying that unmistakable spark of determination I remembered from decades ago. She waved, and I felt an unexpected rush of emotion, a mixture of pride, nostalgia, and that bittersweet ache of time passing too quickly. We walked together, reminiscing about the old studio, the long rehearsals, the laughter and frustrations, the countless pirouettes and missteps. Emily told me about her life, her own children, and how she had introduced them to dance, passing forward the lessons I had once given her. I realized then that my influence stretched far beyond the walls of my studio, carried in the hearts and movements of those I had taught. We paused near a fountain, the water shimmering in the afternoon sun. I noticed the way her fingers lingered over the edges of the stone, just as I had taught her to respect the details, the spaces, the pauses between movement. She smiled at me, a quiet acknowledgement that we shared a connection no time could erase. That encounter stirred memories I hadn't thought of in years. The first ballet performance I had directed, the nervous laughter backstage, the scent of rossin and polished floors, the way the orchestra hummed in harmony with the dancers' steps. I felt both the weight of those years and the lightness of having lived them fully, with passion and purpose.
Walking home that day, I felt a renewed sense of gratitude for the students, the music, the long hours of practice, and the enduring relationships that had defined my life. The world had changed, yes, but the rhythm of human connection remained, timeless and unyielding. As the days grew shorter and the crispness of autumn deepened, I found myself thinking more about love, both the love I had lost and the love that had endured. Marjorie, my late wife, came to mind often. I remembered the first time I had seen her at a recital, standing in the back row with her notebook, jotting down every detail, every movement. Her passion for life and art had mirrored my own, and together we had built a life filled with creativity, laughter, and occasionally heated disagreements over music and timing. I remembered the nights we stayed up talking, planning lessons, choreographing routines, dreaming of the students we hoped would find their own rhythm in life. Her absence now was a hollow ache, but it was softened by the countless memories we had shared. Love, I realized, was not only in presence, but in remembrance, in the way it shaped who we were, and in the warmth that lingered long after someone had gone. I also reflected on my children, grown now, scattered across the country, each finding their own path. I felt pride mixed with a pang of longing, knowing I had passed on not only the skills of movement, but the values of discipline, patience, and joy. It struck me that my life had been a series of connections, some brief, some enduring, but all meaningful, all part of the rhythm that made me who I was. Even in solitude, I found solace in the simple pleasures: morning coffee by the window, the faint smell of leaves and earth drifting through the park, and the gentle cadence of footsteps on cobblestone streets. I learned to hear the music in everyday life, the subtle beats and pauses that had once guided dancers across the stage. It reminded me that even as time passes, there is beauty in movement, in memory, in the pulse of life itself. One rainy afternoon, drawn by curiosity and a sense of nostalgia, I walked past the old dance studio. The windows were fogged, and the familiar scent of rosin and polished wood still clung faintly to the air, as if the building itself remembered the years we had spent there. Inside, a new class was in session, teenagers moving with tentative precision, some awkward, some graceful, but all eager to learn. I lingered by the doorway, unnoticed, and watched as the young instructor guided them through a routine. Her movements reminded me of my own teaching style, the emphasis on timing, posture, and expression. A strange warmth filled me, a mix of pride and relief that the art I had devoted my life to was alive, even without me at the helm. After class, she noticed me standing there and smiled. "You look familiar," she said. I hesitated, then told her who I was, about the studio's history, the performances, the countless students who had passed through these doors. She listened, genuinely intrigued, and invited me to share a few tips. Hesitant at first, I stepped onto the floor. The wooden boards creaked beneath my feet just as they had decades ago. I guided them through a simple exercise, demonstrating the subtle weight shifts, the rhythm of breath with movement. Their eyes lit up with understanding, and in that moment I felt the same thrill I had felt teaching Marjorie's students so many years before. Leaving the studio that day, I realized that life has a rhythm beyond our control. It flows, pauses, shifts, and yet circles back, offering opportunities to connect, to teach, to inspire, even when we think our time has passed. I walked home with a quiet joy, knowing that the music, the dance, and the passion would continue to ripple through the world, carried by hands and feet I had never met before. Evenings became my sanctuary. I would sit by the window, listening to the distant hum of the city, the faint laughter of children playing in the park, and the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. Memories flowed freely now, not just of the stage, the studio, or the applause, but of small, intimate moments. The nervous smile of a student before their first performance, the warmth of Marjorie's hand in mine backstage, the quiet pride in my children's eyes when they mastered a step I had taught them. I often thought about the passage of time, the fleeting nature of youth, and the inevitability of aging. There were moments of fear, too, the fear of irrelevance, of fading into obscurity, of losing touch with the world I had once known so intimately. But those fears were tempered by gratitude. I had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind more than just memories. I had passed on knowledge, artistry, and the spark of inspiration to those who would carry it forward. Sometimes I would hum a melody from one of the operas I had conducted, letting it fill the quiet of my apartment. Other times, I would watch a recording of a recital, recognizing faces from decades ago, their youthful energy frozen in time, yet alive in memory. I realized that life's true dance isn't only on the stage. It's in how we move through the years, how we embrace each fleeting moment, and how we leave echoes of ourselves in others. And as the city lights blinked awake each night, I felt a profound sense of peace. My life had been rich, messy, joyful, and full of challenges, but ultimately, it was mine. Every note, every step, every heartbeat had led me to this moment of quiet contentment, and I cherished it deeply. The morning sun spilled gold across the park as I took my usual stroll, my cane tapping lightly against the pavement. The world felt calm, steady, and full of subtle wonders, the flutter of pigeons, the laughter of children chasing each other in the park, and the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. Everything seemed smaller somehow, softer, yet infinitely more precious. I thought back over my 71 years, the twists and turns, the highs and lows, the nights of exhilaration after a flawless performance, and the times I had stumbled, uncertain of the next step. Every challenge, every joy, every heartbreak had shaped me into the man I was now. Older, perhaps, slower in movement, but sharper in awareness, deeper in feeling. I remembered the faces of the students who had trusted me, the colleagues who had become lifelong friends, and even the moments of betrayal or disappointment that tested my resilience. Each memory was a brushstroke in the portrait of my life, and I realized that the full picture was beautiful, vibrant, and entirely my own. I paused by a fountain, watching ripples spread across the water, and felt a quiet, profound gratitude for the love I had given and received, for the art I had shared, for the lives I had touched, for the rhythm of life itself, the dance that had carried me from boyhood to this golden age of reflection. And in that moment, I smiled. I was happy. Not because life had been perfect, but because it had been lived fully, passionately, with purpose. I had been a conductor, a teacher, a friend, a lover, a guide, and all of it had mattered. I had lived, truly lived, and that was enough. The city stirred around me, vibrant and alive, and I walked on, carrying my memories like music in my soul, feeling the harmony of a life well lived resonate with every step.